The clock reads 3 a.m. as countless souls lie awake, staring blankly at their ceilings. They're paralysed by the sudden, visceral realisation that one day they will simply cease to exist. That everything they've built, learned, and loved will eventually fade into nothingness. I am one of those people. And if viewer statistics are anything to go by, so are most of you. What's fascinating, however, is not that we fear death. That seems rather sensible, doesn't it? But that this fear might be masking something far more terrifying, the fear of actually living. Stay with me for the next few minutes, and I promise you'll never look at existential dread the same way again. Because what if our obsession with mortality is merely a convenient distraction from the overwhelming responsibility of existence itself? The ancient Epicureans had a rather clever argument about death. Where death is, I am not. Where I am, death is not. Essentially, you'll never experience your own non-existence, so why worry about it? Case closed, anxiety cured, pub? Except it doesn't quite work that way, does it? The fear persists. We continue waking up in cold sweats, contemplating our inevitable demise. We build elaborate belief systems, dedicate monuments, and create endless art about mortality. Our culture is saturated with death precisely because we're so desperately trying to make sense of it. But here's where things get properly strange. Despite our apparent fear of death, we humans have an astonishing talent for avoiding life. We postpone joy, defer dreams, and dilute our existence with mindless distractions, all while claiming to be terrified of losing the very life we're not fully living. It's as if we're more comfortable contemplating our demise than confronting the vertigo of freedom and possibility that comes with being alive. The French philosopher Albert Camus put it rather bluntly: there is only one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Not because he was morbid, but because he recognized that the fundamental question isn't why we die, but why we choose to live at all in a seemingly absurd universe. This raises a provocative question. What if our fear of death is actually a misattribution? What if what truly terrifies us is the raw, unfiltered experience of being alive? Consciousness is a peculiar evolutionary adaptation. While it allows us to create symphonies and calculate the distance to distant galaxies, it also burdens us with a uniquely human affliction, the awareness of our own mortality. We are the only creatures, as far as we know, who must carry the weight of our inevitable extinction in our daily shopping bags, along with the milk and bread. Bit of a design flaw, if you ask me. But consciousness gives us something else that's rather inconvenient. Choice, freedom, responsibility. The existentialists weren't being dramatic when they suggested that freedom can be absolutely terrifying. Jean-Paul Sartre described this as a kind of vertigo. Not the fear of falling from a height, but the fear that nothing stops you from jumping. The sheer possibility overwhelms us. We are condemned to be free, forced to create meaning in a universe that offers no instruction manual. Consider how often we surrender our freedom willingly. We follow prescribed life paths, defer to authorities, embrace rigid ideologies, all ways of escaping the burden of choice. We'd rather follow someone else's map than face the blank canvas of possibility. Ernest Becker, in his Pulitzer Prize-winning book The Denial of Death, suggested that much of human civilization is essentially an elaborate distraction from mortality. But perhaps it's not death we're avoiding, but the terrifying responsibility of creating our own meaning in the face of cosmic indifference. It's far easier to worry about the end than to confront the dizzying freedom of the middle. Let's conduct a thought experiment. Imagine you're granted immortality tomorrow, no more death to fear. Problem solved? Hardly. If anything, eternal life would amplify the fundamental question, what now? What will you do with infinity? The burden of choice becomes exponentially heavier without the convenient excuse of limited time. This reveals something crucial about existential dread. It's often less about fearing the end and more about avoiding the overwhelming task of making our finite time meaningful. Irvin Yalom, the existential psychotherapist, observed this pattern in countless patients. Their death anxiety frequently masked deeper fears. The fear of unlived potential, of making the wrong choices, of confronting regret. When pressed, many discovered they weren't afraid of dying so much as they were afraid they hadn't truly lived. Look at how we structure our lives. We defer happiness to some future point, after the promotion, after the house purchase, after retirement, as if the present moment is merely a waiting room for real life to begin. We treat existence as a dress rehearsal for a performance that never arrives. We lose ourselves in distractions, in mindless consumption, in the endless scroll. Not because these activities bring profound satisfaction, but precisely because they allow us to avoid the discomfort of facing our freedom and responsibility. The Polish philosopher Zygmunt Bauman noted that in our liquid modern society, we've replaced the fear of mortality with the fear of inadequacy. We're not worried about dying so much as we're worried about dying without having amounted to enough. If you've made it this far into the video, I'm guessing you're the sort who doesn't shy away from the existential deep end. So before we continue, if you're finding value in this philosophical exploration, consider subscribing to the channel. Each week, we dive into these murky waters together, challenging comfortable assumptions and exploring what it means to exist in this bizarre universe of ours. Now, back to our regularly scheduled existential crisis. What would it mean to face life with the same intensity with which we fear death? To embrace what the existentialists called authenticity, the courageous acceptance of freedom, choice, and limitation. Authenticity demands that we stop using death as an excuse to avoid life. It requires confronting the discomfort of possibility, making choices without the safety net of predetermined meaning, and taking responsibility for creating significance in a universe that offers none inherently. The psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, observed that those who fared best in those horrific conditions were not necessarily the physically strongest, but those who managed to find meaning even in suffering. His logotherapy approach suggests that the primary motivational force in humans is not pleasure or power, but the drive to find meaning. The question then is not how to avoid death anxiety, but how to transform it into a catalyst for authentic living. Søren Kierkegaard, that wonderfully gloomy Dane, proposed that anxiety is not something to be cured, but something to be passed through, a necessary stage in developing a genuine self. The vertigo of freedom is the price of authentic existence. What if, instead of distracting ourselves from death, we used our mortality as a clarifying lens through which to view life? Not in a morbid YOLO fashion that merely replaces thoughtful living with impulsivity, but as a boundary that gives shape and urgency to our choices? We began with a question: is our fear of death actually a fear of life? Perhaps the answer lies not in resolving the paradox, but in embracing it. Death gives life its shape and significance. Without endings, beginnings and middles lose their meaning. Our mortality is both our limitation and our opportunity. It forces us to choose, to prioritize, to create meaning within constraints. As Heidegger suggested, authentic being toward death doesn't mean being morbidly obsessed with mortality, but using the awareness of finitude to break free from conventional, inauthentic modes of existence. To live deliberately, purposefully, in full acknowledgement of both our freedom and our limitations. Perhaps the real challenge isn't overcoming death anxiety, but transforming it into a fierce commitment to life. Not someday, not after the next achievement or acquisition, but now, in this moment, with all its terrifying freedom and possibility. So I'll leave you with this. What would change in your life if you stopped using the fear of death as an excuse to avoid the vertigo of truly living? What would you do differently if you recognized that existential dread might actually be life calling you toward authenticity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. After all, confronting the abyss is always better with company. Until next time, remember, to fear death is human. To use that fear as fuel for an authentic life, that's wisdom.